Okay, so thank you very much. So before we get started, I wanted to just welcome you to the UBC Library Systematic and Scoping Review workshop series. This is part 2, and this workshop will be focused on translating database searches and finding gray literature. And librarians here today, myself, Helen Brown, there's also Ursula Ellis and Charlotte Beck, and we are librarians with UBC Library, and we actually all happen to be working out of Woodward Library. And we would also like to and move that forward. Acknowledge that UBC and Vancouver, where some of us are stationed currently, are located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. We thank them for having cared for these lands and waters since time immemorial, and we'd also like to acknowledge the research being done and the knowledge held by research and knowledge keepers from these communities. We also want to look at our own research practices and the resources and knowledge systems that they're based on, recognizing that they often come from colonial systems and practice. So I'll talk more about research guides in a moment, but I wanted to point out the wonderful guides created by the Huiqua Library, including one on Indigenous research methodologies, as well as research by Indigenous scholars and resources like the bibliography of Native North Americans, the Native Health Database, and especially gray literature sources, including theses and dissertations, where you can find a lot of that research. And in the context of knowledge synthesis studies, one resource that I might suggest is Indigenous Knowledge and Knowledge Synthesis Translation and Exchange by Dr. Carmen Ellison, and that's published by the National Collaborating Center for Aboriginal Health. So I will put that in the chat so that you can find it. And our learning objectives today are to learn how to, or get a sense of how to translate a search between databases, how to find gray literature, and use appropriate tools to design and document your search. And roughly what we'll be looking at is searching databases and translating searches. So these are mostly going to be focused on some health databases, but also a fair number of non-health related databases, because we're often working in a variety of fields. We will have some breakout rooms where you could practice, you could take an extended break if you like, or you can ask us any questions that are coming up. And oftentimes a lot of questions arise when you are getting involved in a review, when you're a little ways in, or when you start to kind of practice and use the different databases and resources. We'll then look at gray literature sources and other sources of information. We'll have another breakout room where, again, you have access to a librarian that you can speak to and ask questions of. And then we'll come back and we'll talk about tracking and reporting your methods, and we'll try to finish at 2:45. Okay, so to begin with, we're going to look at search translation. So usually systematic and scoping reviews will search a minimum of 2 databases, but up to 15. And the number really varies widely by research topic. And one of the first questions that always comes up is, which databases do you need to search? And subject guides are a really good tool to use. So for example, if we look at the Woodward Library page, if you happen to be working in one of the sciences, you can see that we have these guides here where we go through some of the different areas that people might be working in, and we can show some resources here that you might want to work with to get started. So for example, under articles, you can find some databases related to forestry, for example. In the library homepage, you can also find a wider list of our research guides by going to research guides right here under Get Research Help. And these are not all of the guides that we create, but all of them that are tied to a specific department or program. And so you can look through here. And if you're working in interdisciplinary areas, it can be really helpful to look at a few different guides to see what information sources you might need to include. So for example, one thing that we can look at is, I'll show you one of the guides that I mentioned earlier. So Indigenous research methodologies is a good guide that I would highly recommend. And there's quite a few others as well. And you can see that in most of the guides that we have, there's a section on articles and databases. There'll also often be a section on books and media, or on films or gray literature or other sources of information. And if you go there, then you can find some of the places where you might like to search, and maybe some tips for searching within your specific field. You can also look at any reviews that you have already identified and check if we have those databases and whether adding them to your search plan will cover additional journals that you might miss otherwise. And one of the things that we hope to accomplish by searching a variety of different databases is to cover the widest set of the journal literature. So each database will cover a certain list of journals, and it's really helpful to then search another database that isn't covering the same body of literature, so that you add more to your to the data that you're pulling in, and you make your systematic review or scoping review or whatever type of evidence synthesis you're doing as comprehensive as possible. So for example, let's close a few of these. If I am looking in the Ovid database, so Ovid Medline, I spoke about that in the first session. It is a core biomedical database. Medline is offered through PubMed, but you can also access it through Ovid. And if we are doing a search in health and medicine, we probably want to search Ovid Medline. But if we then translate our search to the Embase database, we're then going to cover a lot more of the research that's being produced outside North America. So different databases will have different focuses, and they'll be covering different journals. So looking at another database is a way to expand the possible research and data that you're including in your review. So I'm actually going to start with an example from Ovid Medline. I'm just going to look at this briefly because then I want to move on to other databases. So I have created a fairly simple search. This is Ovid Medline right here. And I'll walk you through how this works. So this search is mostly related to a topic that is about whether cranberries can be an effective treatment to reduce or eliminate recurrence or of urinary tract infections. So we're looking for urinary tract infections, cranberries, and I'm also limiting this search to just randomized control trials. So I want to just find that literature that kind of fits within those three areas. And what this might look like, and you'll probably remember from the first section, is that what we want to look for subject headings within the database related to, for example, urinary tract infections. And in fact, when I looked, I was able to find one. You can see that it is shown right here, and there's a slash that in this database indicates that that is a subject heading. You can also see here that I did a keyword search, and I limited my keyword search to title, abstract, and author-added keywords, and I'm using these field codes here to do that. When we would search more generally in a database, we might use like a search field that is looking in a wide variety of the article record, and generally speaking, with systematic reviews, we want to be as comprehensive as possible. We want to kind of expand our searches, but this is one of those places where we can narrow it in a little bit. And we can say, actually, we're just going to search for those terms that are occurring in the title, the abstract, and the author-added keywords. And I'm looking for urinary tract or bladder, and I'm using that Boolean operator. So I'm telling the database this one or this one, and I'm searching with adjacency. So I'm looking for it adjacent within 3 to the word infection, and I've truncated infections, but I'm also getting infections. I've then said, well, you know what? Acronyms are also an important thing to search for in many cases, particularly in this search. So I'm also looking for UTI or UTIs. And then I'm combining all 3 of these terms together. So I'm saying to the database, I want all the subject headings, the keywords or the acronyms related to UTIs. And then I search for my second concept, which is cranberries. So I've searched for the subject heading, which is the scientific name for cranberries. I've searched the keyword of the scientific name or just cranberry, and I've truncated that. So I'm also getting cranberries, and I've combined those together with OR. And then, of course, I'm actually looking for both. I want all of the research that is substantively about both cranberries and UTIs. And so I've combined those 2 sets together with and, as you can see right here. And in addition to that, I also said that I was only going to look for RCTs. So in the database, I could use a limit, but we don't typically do that when we're doing these types of studies. We'll use a search filter. And Cochrane, which is the leader in these methodologies in systematic reviews of interventions in particular, they have a guide. And within that guide, there's a technical supplement where they have published different search hedges or search filters for RCTs. So for example, this is what it looks like. This is the one for Ovid Medline. And the purpose of this is to create as sensitive a search as possible. So we want to make sure to gather all of those RCTs. And if you have any questions, of course, about any of this, please feel free to put it in the chat, and Ursula and Charlotte will answer your questions. Okay, so that is my brief overview of my search that I've done in Ovid Medline. And so the real question is, how might we then adapt that for another database? So for example, if I want to search in the Embase database, I mentioned that that would help me to search in other journals that Medline isn't necessarily covering. And so I want to go to the Embase database. Now you'll notice that it looks essentially the same. It's offered on the same platform, which is Ovid. But you can see down here that it says that we're actually searching the Embase database. So what I would like to do is search within here, and I'm going to take the same search that I started with over here, the same kind of general structure, and I'm going to search for it within the Embase database. So I'm going to take urinary tract infections, and I'm going to see, does Embase have a subject heading for this term? Okay, and it suggests that it does, so I'll look at that term a little bit more. I would usually do quite a bit of exploration, but I'm going to do kind of a fast demo today. You can see that it's laid out in a different way than Medline had it. So it's used for these terms. There are some broader terms and there are some narrower terms. Now I'm going to kind of make an assumption here that maybe one of these narrower terms is relevant. And what I will do is continue on and include that in my search. Cross my fingers. There we go. Okay, so you can see how it shows it. These are the subject headings that Embase has, but it's showing it up in this essentially the same way because we're using the Ovid platform. And what I will do is I will just take my keywords. I can generally keep these essentially the same because we're using the same platform. So I'll put that into my database as well. And in this case, if you have used Embase in the past, you'll have note that these field codes were slightly different and they've actually made them so that they are the same now. Okay, so we'll want to include these together. We'll combine them with OR. And then we'll search for our cranberries. Okay. Now I noticed with Embase, they're actually using just cranberry, and Embase is also a little bit more specific. So we look down here, they're being more specific. They're actually saying, well, there's also cranberry extract or cranberry juice. For this particular search, I don't really, it doesn't really matter to me how it is administered. I just want anything related to cranberries that you would ingest. Okay, so we have our different subject headings here. We can also take our keywords. And I can combine those together as well with OR. And then I can combine my two sets. So that's essentially how it would work. So what I want to do is I'm using a different database. It's searching different literature. It's actually on the same platform. The subject headings that they're using are going to be a little bit different. So I want to actually find the subject headings that they're using in this database. But the keywords that I'm searching, I'm really searching the words that the author used. So those might actually be the same. So hopefully I have tested all of these terms before and I know that they are going to get me to the literature that I need for my systematic review. And so I know that those are good terms to use and they're probably going to be just fine for this database as well. So we want to replace the subject headings, but probably keep the keywords. However, we might need to make some adjustments. So I'll show you some other databases where we would be doing that. I also note that the filter that I was using was developed for the Medline database. And so you can see here that it specifies Medline. So I want to find the version that has been developed for the Embase database, which is very helpfully available right here. So I would take this filter and I would just line by line, essentially plunk it into my search so that I can limit my search results to RCTs only. Okay. Another thing that I would do is I would save my search. So for example, in Ovid Medline here, I would save it. And after I had actually created my draft search in one database, I had tested it. I had tested it against a test set of articles that I knew that I would need to find, and then I have translated it to my different databases and I have run those results and exported them into Covidence or something similar that I was using to manage all of those results. What I would then do is I would also save it as an alert, and then I would set it up so that the database would run that search for me and send me any of the new results from that search in order to keep my review up to date. Okay, so when we look at the systematic review guide, which is available right here, you're probably familiar with this first page here. There is a section on running your searches, and it has a lot more information about how to search. So there's some tutorials on how to use Medline. There's sections on subject headings, including some search filter sources where they publish search filters that you may like to use. There's also a section on keywords. This one is particularly helpful because it shows some of the variations between how keywords are used in different databases. And you can scroll down to see quite a few other databases, including Web of Science and Scopus, for example, and ProQuest and CabDirect. There's also some information about Boolean and about limiting or refining your search. Okay, so at this point, I want to get into what I like to refer to as kind of my lightning talks demo part of the workshop. And I'm going to look at quite a few different databases so that we're looking at ones that are maybe particularly useful for topics in other areas. So the first one that I would start with is Web of Science, and I'm going to use a topic that is related to climate change and food security and law or justice. And I'm going to start with Web of Science. It's often a good resource for science, social sciences, or humanities. It's a very good general database. There's also some other products that you might be interested in. So you can see that there's also journal citation reports, which you may use for other purposes, or EndNote to manage citations. It's a basic version of EndNote that is available. And what we want to look at today, of course, is the searching. So I'll very quickly go through Web of Science, and then I'll move on to some other databases as well. Okay, so oftentimes what I want to do is go to the advanced search. This is advanced kind of searching techniques, and so it often has the functionality that I want in the advanced search section of the database. And one of the things that we'll note here is that there's these field tags or field codes, and some of those are related to the field codes that I was using earlier, like title and abstract, for example. And so I'll make use of those right here. So I will do my first search terms, and I'll put it in here and I'll explain what it is I'm doing here. Okay, so here I'm looking for climate change. I want to, for example, put the word climate change in quotation marks. So this is the way I'm looking for climate change together within an article record and not just the word change, because the word change could relate to anything. So I want to keep those two terms together, and this is called phrase searching. There's also quite a few different synonyms for climate change. The terminology has changed quite rapidly over the years, and there might be specific areas of this that you're looking for. And so I want to kind of lay out all of those various terms that different authors might be using. So it could be global warming, climate crisis, et cetera, et cetera. I'm also searching within title here. And what I've done here is I'm saying, find all of these terms right here within the title or the abstract. I'll just repeat the same terms right here. Or I might also like to find them within the author added keywords. So this looks like quite a long search, but it's actually just the same set of terms repeated 3 times, and I'm looking in different parts of the article record, the title, the abstract, and the author added keywords. And I can click search. Okay, and then I can then search for my second set of terms. So this is going to relate to food security. So you can see that I have the word security, and I've used a truncation. So that's the asterisk. So I get security or securities, or scarcity or insecurity or insecurities. I've also searched for desert or deserts. And I could have used truncation here too, but if I had done that, I would have also gotten literature related to deserting, which isn't that relevant. And that literature may disappear when I combine this with some of my other concepts in my research question. But I just wanted to kind of point that out. When we use truncation, sometimes you pull in other terms as well that maybe you didn't intend. And so just to keep an eye on that. And what I'm doing is I'm searching for any of these terms, security, scarcity, insecurity, deserts, near within 3 words, whoops, put that back over here, of the word food, nutrition, or diet. And this is the same as the adjacency searching in Ovid, but they've just made it a little bit different. So they always just have to be like a little bit different just to keep things confusing. So instead of ADJ, we're going to say near in this database. And you can see that I've repeated this for the title, the abstract, and the author added keywords. Okay, and I'm going to clear my search. I'm going to do my last search really quickly. And this one's just going to be generally about law and justice. I was a little scarce with my search terms in this case, but you can see that I'm searching for the same elements, the title, the abstract, and the author added keywords. And then I will go to my advanced search, and I'll be able to see all of my searches here at the bottom. And what I want to do is I want to combine those together. And I want to combine them with AND, just like we did in Ovid Medline and in Embase. And then I can see my results here. So for example, a human rights approach to the health implications of food and nutrition insecurity, taking into account things like climate change, urbanization, et cetera. And so hopefully the research that you get is relatively close to the research question that you have. Okay, so the next database I will look at is PsycInfo. So this is a database that covers psychology, psychological aspects of related disciplines that include health, sociology, education, linguistics, anthropology, sport, business, and law. It is on the EBSCO database. The EBSCO database might be familiar to you. There's quite a few databases that are offered, or the EBSCO interface rather, might be familiar because there's quite a few databases that are offered on it. If you are working in the area of education, for example, you might also be looking at the ERIC database as well as PsycInfo. That one is often relevant as well. And I'll show you quickly how to do a search within this. So one thing I didn't mention about Web of Science is that we didn't search for subject headings because it doesn't really have any subject headings that are that usable. In PsycInfo, it does. So we'll do a subject heading search as well. And we'll also search for our keywords. So first I'm going to start off by looking for the subject heading, and I click off that suggest subject terms. Okay, so here we are, and you can see that there's a subject heading for climate change and global warming. I'm going to go a little bit quickly and just kind of assume that these are related to my subject, and I'm going to put those into my search. And in this database, it shows that they are subject headings by using DE. So that's how it shows that within your search. And then I will clear that, and I will start searching for my keywords. So actually, maybe I'll just go into advanced search as well. So there's a couple of different ways that we can do this, but I can just put them in here like this, and then we'll take a look at them. Okay. And if we look at search history, you'll be able to see these searches. So I can see that my two subject headings are here, climate change or global warming. I also have all of my keywords. And I have, like I did in Web of Science, specified that some of them will be in the abstract, for example, and some of them will be in the title. There's also keywords that we could search for as well, author-added keywords. So I'll do another search, and I'll also combine these together with OR. Okay, and I always have to clear my search in this database, so I often do forget to do that. So I'm going to search for food insecurity, and there is a subject heading for that as well, so I'm going to add that to my search. And clear it. And then I will search for my search terms again. And I'll just do this in a slightly different way than I did before, just to show you another way that you could do it. So for example, I could add in title, I could click OR, I could do another search for abstract, and I could do a third search for author added keywords, which I think are down here. Okay, and I can click clear. And when I'm looking here at my search, hopefully you can see it. I've got all my same search terms. Again, the adjacency searching is there, but it's articulated a little bit different. Instead of near, they use N, so we just N3. They just want to be a little bit different from the other databases. And I've otherwise combined it the same way. The field codes might be a little bit different, but they mean the same thing, and you can find the definitions of each of them and what they mean within the guides for the different databases. Okay, we can put those together with OR, and we can, of course, combine our sets at the end as well. And here's our results. Okay. And moving on to a slightly different database. So we're going to look at AESD. So Agriculture and Environmental Science Collection. This is a database that's on the ProQuest platform. So I wanted to show you what this one looks like. And it focuses on environmental science, pollution, ecology, agriculture, and engineering. And it includes tools like truncation and phrase searching, proximity, and field codes like the other databases. The one thing that I would note about ProQuest databases is that especially when you are working with larger volumes of articles or results, the number that it estimates for how many that you've retrieved is actually an estimate. So it might not actually be accurate. As you progress through looking at the different results, that number might actually change. Whereas with those other databases, the number is going to be accurate. With this one, it's more of an estimate. And this is important in your reporting for systematic reviews. So it is something that you do have to kind of figure out. And you just kind of need to do that by moving through the results. Okay, so one thing that I can do is I can search using field codes as I did before. I can use title, abstract, and subject heading. And this is one of the ways that I can do that. And I can combine that with my other terms. So for example, I'll put this all in one search. I'll put another one there and I can add another row. And you can see that I'm reusing essentially the same search. This one actually uses adjacency searching that is near 3, but many of the other tools that I'm using, such as the phrase searching, are essentially the same. The other thing that you can notice here is that you can come back here. There might also be subject headings that are of use. So you can look in the thesaurus to see if there is, and you can search in there for any relevant subject headings that you might be able to use, or you can use some of the field codes. And in the recent searches, you can combine it this way, or you can combine it in some of the other ways that we've done in some of the other databases. So there are often multiple options for how to combine different searches. And one thing to note with this database is that if you're using the basic search, it will often look for the terms within the full text unless you click NOFT, which turns off the full text. But if you use the field codes like I have here, it actually turns that off for you. Okay, and the last database that I want to look at is the PACE index. And I think I will just go ahead and search for it again so that I don't get logged out. Close that down. And here it is. And this one focuses on research journals that are in public policy, social policy, and the social sciences. So I wanted to search this database as well so that it's a little bit different subject area. And they use a thesaurus as well. This one is particularly useful. So I'm going to start by searching for climate change. And in this case, I find there's climate change. There's also pollution. I'll put that in just to get started. And I can also search for my author keywords right here. So I'm searching in the title, the abstract, and the subject heading for those words related to climate change. Okay. And then I'll go back to my advanced search. I can clear my form as I do in the other ones. I'm now going to look in the thesaurus as well, which is where you would look for your subject headings if you've ever wondered what that means within a database. They do have one for food security, so I'll add this to my search as well. And I want to combine these with OR. You can see here we're using near/3 as our adjacency searching. Okay, and this is a legal database actually. So before I was being a little bit simple with my legal terms, but in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to search for a couple subject headings that are more specific. So this database is going to have fuller subject headings about legal topics because it is one of the focuses of the database. So I'll search for environmental justice just to get started. I can see that there's a subject heading for that. I'll also search for another one. Let's see, how about environmental law? And you want to try out as many different terms as you can to make sure that you're finding all of the subject headings that are relevant. Okay, so I've got those ones. I'm going to combine these with OR, of course. I'll combine this one as well. And now I'll try my my keywords, and I'll keep those fairly simple. I wouldn't in reality, but just for the sake of the demo. Okay. And you can see that I'm retrieving quite large results, but I haven't put my searches together yet. So I want to go to my recent searches, and it will give me a bit of a history. And what I can do here is I can search S2 or 2 or 3 or 4, and that's how you combine the searches in this database. And it will give you your end results. Okay. So that is essentially how that works. I do think I made a mistake here. We can go and look and see what it was, but there shouldn't be quite that many results. Let's see here. I probably forgot to clear it. But we want to make sure that all of our searches are combined together in the right way. Okay. So anyways, we are now available to take any questions that you want. We're going to take a 5-minute break. We can come back at 1:42, and when we do that, we will be available to answer any questions during that time if you like, or you can take a break, and then we will go into a practice session where we can look into these in more detail if you want to. You can have time to practice, or you can also ask really specific questions about your research project and your systematic review or scoping review, rapid review, any type that you're doing, and we're happy to share resources. And after that, we're going to look at gray literature, which is a required part of these types of reviews and a really important part, and can involve quite a few different sources. And sometimes for some reviews, it might actually be the most substantial part of the review, depending on the type of evidence that they're looking for. So please take a break, and we'll see you at 1:42. Thank you.
Okay, everyone. I wondered if there were any interesting questions that came up in the breakout rooms that anybody would like to chat about before we proceed on to the next section. Helen or Charlotte?
One question that came up, of course, was where you can find more information about the different field codes and the different tools that you use in the databases. And so, of course, there is a guide that we maintain on the systematic review and scoping review methods research guide, where we've got a table, and I can put that link in the chat again in just a moment, but it does lay out some of the tools for some of the different databases. Some of these things change over time, so it's nice to rely on either the database itself or people who are watching it closely. So this is a good tool to go to. The other thing that you can do as well, of course, is I often go to the little like help icon for the guides for the different databases, or sometimes it's a little like question mark or search tips sort of page in each database, just to verify that the tool that I'm using is going to work the way that I think that it's going to work, because it does vary from database to database. And if Ursula or Charlotte, if you have any tips as well, please jump in.
The only tip I have, which is one that I recommend for my 2 questions that I had, they were both interdisciplinary. 2 different subject guides would be needed for finding the right set of databases. And so it would be consult with a librarian for any complexity that can't be found on your own on the internet.
Oh yeah, I had another question too that came up that might be of use to people. It was about how Embase brings in a lot more results than other databases. And this is true, it's known, we encounter this a lot. Embase essentially kind of over indexes things. So they add those subject headings to articles that maybe aren't substantively about the subject heading. And so that there are ways to kind of make that a little bit narrower and to sort of trim that down. And you probably want to speak to a librarian about how to do that for your specific search. And there's also a publication from CADITH called Pruning Emtree, which Emtree is what the subject headings are called. And it can give a little bit of guidance as well about how to narrow that down even further if you're having significant problems with Embase just bringing in a lot more results than you would expect.
And just to build on that Web of Science, I think you went over this, Helen, but just to reiterate that it's best not to use that default all fields setting, because it will pull in things from like the cited references for a particular article, author affiliations, and ProQuest is another offender where, definitely turn off that no full text default field.
Actually, that brings to mind too. So part of the reason why we narrow it down to those, like title, abstract, author-added keywords fields is because sometimes the database will search those other fields. And for example, I have had trouble with searches related to cancer in the past where it was pulling in literature from the BC Cancer Agency that was maybe written by a librarian about doing systematic reviews and wasn't at all about cancer, but it was just because their affiliation had the word cancer in it, and it was grabbing that and pulling in that research. So there are some terms that will do that, and just kind of limiting it, as Ursula said, not to the all fields, but to those specific ones where you would expect it to be about the actual content of the research can be very helpful.
Any other comments from the breakout rooms? Okay, then moving right ahead, I'm going to be talking about other sources and gray literature. So many of you have probably seen Prisma flow diagrams of this nature, where there is a box at the top where you report the total number of results that you found through searching your databases, such as Medline, Embase, Web of Science. And then there's this other box that says additional records identified through other sources. Now, I've got a poll for you. What are these other sources? And just launch it here. Okay. So which types of resources are other sources? Journal articles, gray literature, citations and reference lists, clinical trials, guidelines and manuals, suggestions from colleagues, or all of the above? Okay, it looks like most folks have had a chance to participate. So let's share those results. So the answer is actually any of these could be considered other sources, including journal articles, if they've been found through sort of unconventional methods, as in not as part of your formal database search. Okay, so just closing that out. And you might be aware that the Prisma diagram has recently undergone some changes as a result of the changes suggested by the Prisma 2020 statement that came out last year. There is now a much more elaborate reporting available for gray literature and what I often call supplemental searching. So instead of just the one box for other sources, there's now a whole other sidebar where you can report things like records that you've identified from individual website searching, from searching through organizational repositories or sort of not our standard databases, but databases that might be maintained by an organization, citation searching. You don't necessarily have to fill out this entire thing if you haven't consulted all of these sources as a part of your review, but it is an option. And I think increasingly we will be seeing Prisma diagrams of this nature as opposed to the more traditional simplified one that I showed on the previous slide. So different guidelines for conducting systematic or scoping reviews have different suggestions as to whether and how to incorporate gray literature. These are Cochrane's requirements from the Messier standards. They say that searching for gray literature, such as reports, dissertations, theses, etc., conference abstracts, is highly desirable. Searching for references within other reviews is also highly desirable. And then searching reference lists of the included studies that you've identified through your own screening process is mandatory. And then just to define gray literature, basically it's anything that's sort of outside of the traditional peer-reviewed journal article or academic scholarly book. So it can include a wide variety of types of documents. Not all of these are going to be relevant to answering every type of research question. And this definition on the slide is from a group called GrayNet. Often they maintain a database of gray literature called OpenGray, and just wanted to note that is not really being maintained anymore. So even though we're referencing this definition because it's kind of the foundational one that's out there, that OpenGray database is not necessarily the best place to go to look for gray literature anymore. So why might you want to include gray literature in a review? It's possible that the relevant data that you need might only be reported in gray literature. And it also helps to avoid the problem of publication bias, where only results with significant findings end up being published. So the image on the slide here is from some research dating from 2008 by Eric Turner. He used to work for the FDA. And the slide here presents some research findings from the published journal literature on antidepressants, which all showed, a significant positive effect. And then inclusive of all of the information that was submitted to the FDA, which is much more detailed and lengthy than what ends up in the journal literature, it was a much more mixed kind of view of the sort of efficacy of this class of drugs. And this is not unique at all to antidepressants. Many drugs and devices have this sort of problem where once you are take into account this unpublished literature in clinical study reports or the conference literature, the picture may not be quite as impressive as far as the efficacy or safety of a particular intervention. So some things to take into consideration about whether and what to include in your systematic or scoping review. Just bear in mind that gray literature is not necessarily peer-reviewed. In the case of things like dissertations or conference abstracts, there has often been some input from other scholars, even if it hasn't been through a formal peer-reviewed process. But again, some things would need to be taken, I think, with more of a grain of salt because they haven't been through that process. It also may be somewhat difficult to extract data or assess risk of bias from some gray literature sources. If you're looking at a 300-page dissertation, that might be difficult to, due to its length, to go through the whole thing and pull out the relevant bits. And then on the other side, there's conference abstracts where there's not necessarily enough information to extract data from or assess bias. Oftentimes, when people do include conference abstracts in their search, they will potentially follow up with the authors of the study to see if there's maybe some additional unpublished data that can be shared. Same thing with information found in clinical trials registries like clinicaltrials.gov. If you find that there's been a trial that's been completed, yet there are no results posted and no journal publication arising from that, that might be something to consider to reach out to the PI there. And you need to kind of think about this stuff at the protocol stage when you're developing your inclusion criteria, rather than doing this later, because it is going to inform your overall search strategy. As well, when you're at the protocol stage, you might not want to be too detailed about the types of gray literature that you'll search. You might have a more kind of a general plan. You could always do a little bit extra if you like, but maybe don't box yourself into a very extensive gray literature search at that protocol stage. But you definitely want to define the types of gray literature that would be eligible for inclusion. So we've got a few different research guides that give you some ideas for gray literature, places to look for it. There's a guide for health sciences, which I'll open in just a moment. There's also one for non-health subjects. This social work guide on the slide has some suggestive research for that discipline, as well as for forestry. There's some resources there related to Indigenous communities. So I'm going to open this tab for the Gray Literature for Health Sciences Guide. This one and the non-health subjects research guide that was on the slide there both have this document, how to find and document gray literature. So this is really useful in terms of thinking about what to include, where to look, and how to go about keeping track. So on the first page of this document, we've got kind of a breakdown of some of the major types of gray literature that you might think about including. And then a first step that's suggested here is to just do a little bit of Googling and think about what sorts of organizations might be producing reports or other types of gray literature on your topic. You could also ask research team members for their suggestions and talk with a librarian for further ideas specific to your discipline. And then the next step here is targeted website browsing or searching. So if you've identified some specific organizations whose websites you want to browse through, say under the research or publications section of the website, this is a suggested way to go about documenting that. So put down the date, the name, the URL, and then the number of items that you screened, so that you actually took a closer look at, kind of akin to the full text screening stage. And then if you've searched within an individual website, either using their own search engine or making use of advanced Google, which will let you type site : and then the URL to search within a website. If the website's own search engine happens to not be so great, this is kind of a useful tool to use. This is how you'd write that up. In this case, it's suggested that for each iteration of a search that you do, that you keep track of the total number of items retrieved, and then the number that you actually took a closer look at in full text. And in that Prisma 2020 flow diagram, up at the top, in the top box, you would report this number, and then the lower box, sort of at the full text screening stage, that's where you report this number, what you actually screened. There are also gray literature databases, so things like clinicaltrials.gov, which because you can't really batch export so easily, or the search is maybe not as robust as something like Ovid Medline or Web of Science, they're kind of considered gray literature databases, and you would report them accordingly. And similar sort of process here. Write down your search terms, total number retrieved, total number screened. And then here's where you could put Google, Google Scholar, etc. And then finally, you might want to contact experts in your field. This applies both to gray literature sources as well as for any journal literature that could have been missed. People use this strategy for kind of both. Okay, going back to this research guide. So there's, under resources by type of literature, a breakdown of some of the major sources for health. This DayLibri database is very helpful if you're doing a topic based in Canada and you want to kind of have a one-stop shop for Canadian government documents at all levels of government, as well as groups like non-governmental organizations, professional associations that are based in Canada. So this is not health specific, it's really pretty interdisciplinary. For conference proceedings, some of the databases that you would search for journal literature also are inclusive of conference proceedings, especially Embase and Web of Science. And then you can also go out and seek individual conferences to look through as well. Preprints, this refers to manuscripts that have been written up but not yet published. They've not yet been through the peer review process. They've probably been submitted to a journal but not yet accepted. Probably the best place to look for these in health is the Europe PMC, because it lets you search several different repositories of these preprints and lets you batch export them in a way that works really well with Covenants or the major citation management software tools. And there's a couple of other suggestions here, particularly outside of health. This research preprint server list will highlight some of those that are more interdisciplinary or focused on the social sciences. Although your PMC does include Research Square and SSRN, which are not specific to health. For clinical trials registries, There's Cochrane Central. There's also the two major registry sites, which are clinicaltrials.gov, and then the WHO's platform, which searches several different registries worldwide. Clinical study reports would really just be of interest if you're doing drug or device related research, and I would suggest definitely contacting a librarian if this is kind of appropriate, because they're awfully hard to get your hands on. And then clinical practice guidelines, there's a few different sources for those, and several different places to look for theses and dissertations. And some of our journal article databases also include selected dissertations. For instance, CINAHL and PsycInfo do selectively include some dissertations. And then the non-health guide similarly kind of breaks down resources that are out there into sort of general categories of gray literature like this. But the very best thing is to connect with a librarian to get some more tailored suggestions. Okay, so that's just a recap of that first page of that document that I shared. And then some other techniques that are worth noting are forward and backward reference searching or reference chaining. So this is often done for the included studies. If you remember from that slide at the beginning, from the Messier standards from Cochrane, this is actually mandatory to take a look at the cited reference list in any studies that you have included that have passed your full text screening, as well looking at related systematic reviews in their included studies, and also doing this forward reference searching to see who has cited your included studies or relevant reviews. And there's a really nice tool called Citation Chaser, which lets you put in all of your included studies, their DOIs or their PubMed IDs, and search for one big list of all of the cited references and all of the citing references. So this will turn up some gray literature, but mostly other journal articles that there's going to be some duplication with things you found through your database search, but also potentially some unique information there as well. And contacting researchers in your field, as I've mentioned, a source for both gray literature and published literature you may have missed. And then hand searching. This may be relevant if there's just not a lot on your topic. What this refers to is just going through journal tables of contents online for a specified period, or conference proceedings, and actually browsing through them, every entry in there. This would be useful if there's important journals in your field that are not indexed in a major database. So some applications might include if there's an important Canadian journal in your field. Sometimes they're not all that well indexed in the major databases. And I know some of the major Indigenous related research journals are not necessarily well indexed in the major sources as well. So hand searching could potentially be valuable in those cases. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and ask if there's any questions that have come up. Okay, I think we are due to have another breakout room. If you have any further questions about, a quick how-to for the Citation Chaser. There may be. I could demonstrate it quickly. I believe there's probably some YouTube videos. There's not any UBC library produced content. I'll just share my screen. It's a really great tool because this used to be a manual process, which is very tedious. Okay, so you go to article input, and I'm going to need an article. So I'll just go to PubMed. Because we need something to feed into it. So I'm just going to copy this first PubMed ID that I see and put it in here. Oops. Try that again. You can also enter DOIs for anything that's not in PubMed. So load the article. So there it is at the bottom. So you just want to verify that that's the right article. And then if you click references and search, this is searching a database called lens.org, which is open access and includes both journal articles as well as some selected great literature. And so here are all the references cited in that article. And then if you click on citations, that's how you can produce a list of citing articles. I suspect, I was going to say I thought this is relatively new. Maybe it hasn't been cited much, but actually there are some citations coming up. And the really nice thing is, say your review has 20 included studies, you can just put in all 20 DOIs or PMIDs or a mix of the two, and then it will create one big list of references and it will deduplicate any duplicates in there, and one big list of citing articles. And you can download those as a RIS file and put them all into Covidence if you want to, or you can take an approach of just kind of skimming through and choosing to examine a few of them in more detail. Does that answer your question? Oh, yes, it does remove duplicates. Okay, and it looks like we're a bit of a smaller group now, so maybe we'll just do some Q&A in the main room rather than doing more breakout rooms, or what do you think, Helen and Charlotte? Were there other questions?
I'm also always curious if there are people who are doing reviews where it's going to be relying largely on great literature as well. So for example, reviews that involve a lot of policy tend to be looking at a lot of great literature and maybe very little of the journal literature.
Yeah, in fact, that document that I was showing is actually derived from an actual systematic review on school breakfast programs in Canada. So that review was based entirely on grey literature. There wasn't really anything published on that. They were looking at documents from school districts around the country. Okay, if there's not more questions, then perhaps I'll hand it over to Charlotte.
Great, thank you, Ursula. I see we're still recording, so we can carry on. We can carry on with that. I've got a poll to run as well, but I just want to get up share my screen. I just need to clean up what I have on site here. All right. Great. Can everyone see? Not yet. Now, can everyone see this next section, which is going to be on tracking and reporting your methods?
Yep.
Thank you. So before we get started on this, I have a poll, which I now need to find where the polling. I wonder if one of my co-hosts could
yeah, I can do it, Charlotte.
Thank you. So the question is going to be, why should you care about your method section? And the choices will be for reproducibility, how you accounted for the potential biases in your systematic scoping review, space to document your search strategy, updating your review. There's increasing pressure to follow proper methodologies. And also, finally, that you remember what your student or research partner did. And you may choose all that apply for these. So seeing no more, and most people have done it, I'll end the poll and share the results. And yes, all apply. So this section is to help satisfy the need for why we need to and how we need to track and record our work in a systematic review. So as literature searches really are the foundation of systematic and other reviews, describing that work is critical to demonstrating attempts to minimize bias and also is necessary for replication. This need is really underpinned in the PRISMA 2020 as it was in 2009, except with the update it's been spelled out more explicitly. And the two elements on this page that refer to that are number 6, where they wish all databases, registers, websites, organizations, reference lists, and other sources that were searched or consulted to be identified, and that the date is specified when each source was last searched. The other number 7 is that you need to present the full search strategies for all databases. And this was new in 2020. Prior to that, one could do one database and just have a comment that that search strategy had been adapted or adopted for the other databases and sources. And now they want to be able to be very explicit about how they were all searched. 16A is more guidance on how to describe the results of the search, and they want to know more about the numbers that are recorded in the flow diagram. And as Ursula showed, the previous flow diagram was fairly simple. The new one is quite a bit more explicit. And in this flow diagram on the left are the identification of studies for the databases and the registers, and you can see that they want to see the numbers that are actually found from each of the databases. So they don't spell it out here, but they do want to say Medline number of hits, Embase number of hits at this point. And then after screening, how many were excluded and how many are going forward for full text retrieval. And then finally, the list that was assessed and eligibility. So noting all of these, it's quite important, I think, at the beginning of a systematic review to be aware of what needs to be recorded, because a lot of this record keeping is done as the process of the systematic review happens. In the flow diagram, it looks pretty linear. The databases go through this route, and then on the right are is the place where the results and the process is described for the grey literature and the other studies. Even though it's linear, it does tend to be more iterative. And as you'll hear in next week in Covidence, Covidence does track the flow diagram. However, it is very linear. And when the additional citations are found from the citation chasing, they need to be recorded higher up this list so that they eventually get subsumed into the report of how many reports were not included and how many reports were included in the final analysis. For these, I'm going to follow this link directly and hope that I'm going to be able to get back again. This is one of the PRISMA Shiny apps that have been created that help with the tracking of the whole systematic review. And 6s and 7 of where the recording of the search strategy and database searching are. And then 16A helps with more detail about the results of the search and what papers or studies were included. Go back here. Other tools or techniques for keeping track is to use that saving the database searches technique that was mentioned earlier. Each of the databases usually makes it possible for you to make an account with their platform and an opportunity to save the search. A big tip is that when the search is finally settled down to being in its final version, is that that search gets saved clearly as the final search. also, because each of the different databases on the same platform gets saved in your account in the same list, it's really important to identify them as being which database and which day it was run. In fact, that's important to naming each search with the name of the database is important from the get-go, because when you want to go back to your search while you're still tweaking it, you want to make sure that you're going to run your Embase search in Embase and not inadvertently open up Medline and run the wrong search there. Other tools to be able to use for the databases is out of Ovid, it's very easy to be able to export the search strategy that goes into a Word document, and the search strategy needs to list the number of results. And so it does produce that document that can go into your paper, your later submission. Other databases like EBSCO, it might be an idea to take a screenshot, or you can use the print feature from your browser to be able to get a snapshot of the search that can then later maybe be turned into a PDF that could be included in your paper as well. Excel is a great tool, particularly for tracking sources and maybe some of your search terms as you're creating your search, but also as Ursula showed, when documenting or tracking the grey literature work, it's really handy to be able to put in the web the URLs and being able to annotate their success or the results from those. Other tools that are useful are citation management software. You'll see I've put a strike through RefWorks. This is a tool that we have got a subscription to, which will end at the end of September. So we're advising anyone who's already got an account with RefWorks and has got references that they need to use in the future to follow the instructions for how to do the migration. And other citation tools that are to different degrees useful in being able to be holding tanks for the results are EndNote, Zotero, and Mendeley. At any event, using these for your citation management is useful. One tip I'm using is to use Covidence more for saving and exporting the results and for doing the deduplication. And at the end of the screening process for the full text is export that set into one of these citation management tools and then be able to use it for in-text citation and your bibliography for your paper. So other help for in the write-up are the looking at the instructions for authors at the different journals that you might be considering for publishing in. And new this year is last year, I think now already, is Prisma S, which is another extension for the Prisma documentation. And it's hiding behind my menu here. Here we go. So Prisma S has a checklist for how to, it elaborates more on number 6 and number 7 of how to account for your database searching and the different registries. And so the requirement is that you name each individual database searched and stating which platform it was on. For example, if you did Medline in Ovid versus some people do Medline in EBSCO, those need to be distinguished. If you've done multi-database searching, which is not something I recommend, but sometimes one can do all the Ovid databases at the same time, they need to list those. As we mentioned, any of the study registries done, the grey literature, how to cite your reference chasing, and any other additional information. And then it lists about your full search strategies, what needs to be included, if there were any limits used, describe those, if you used any published filters, like citing that randomized controlled trial filter that we saw for the different platforms. And also if sometimes you might be updating a systematic review that was done a few years back, then that needs to be cited as well. The other useful tool that the Prisma S document has, and I've got a link on the slides to this, is the living document has a Word document, which I hope will open up, where they have created a number of examples of how to write up each of those different sections. So for example, for item 1B, a statement could be something like the following databases were searched using the Ovid interface, the date Medline, which day, Embase, which day, PsycInfo, etc. And then they've got examples for each of those. It's a really handy document. So that was the examples document. What they've also done is demonstrated with the Prisma S is they've used what's called Open Science Framework. This is an open document that's really useful for being project management for the whole systematic review. It's a place where you can store your files, decisions, meeting notes, and it also allows you to register the protocol. So other sources that are helpful are the Systematic Review Guide, which we've mentioned several times in this session. And in that guide, under the Writing Methods section, is a list to all the different variations of Prisma. There's a special one for scoping reviews. I don't see the one for protocols here. And of course, the Cochrane Handbook of Systematic Reviews for Interventions, being the leaders of the whole systematic review methodology. This is a good foundational resource to use. So coming up, that is the end of this section. Are there any questions in the chat? So then moving on then is, I guess, advertising our next part 3, where other tools for managing the screening process, screening criteria and the appraisal will be covered, and the Open Science Framework will be demonstrated more elaborately. And the link to the next event is here, or you could Google UBC Library Systematic Review Workshop, and it'll be part 3. And that will be next Thursday at 1 o'clock. So on behalf of all of us, I'd like to say thank you very much for attending the workshop, and we look forward to seeing you again and or being consulted for your topics.